Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be back again for another timely conversation. Over the last several months, we've seen the impact of COVID not only here in our own country, but countries around the world. And as you've heard, when India started to experience a rapid rise in COVID-19 cases, we knew as a business community we had to act. And I've been doing this a long time, and I've never seen anything quite like it. The launch of the Global Task Force on Pandemic Response back in May was a result of this amazing collaboration between so many dozens of these companies and a few select nonprofits. The businesses in the coalition mobilized over $46 million to assist in India, and it took immediate actions to help. We delivered 1,000 ventilators, as you saw in the video. We've also delivered over 30,000 oxygen concentrators to the country. And as the video illustrated, this was not easy, but all the companies involved, especially Medtronic, were driven by a common goal. It was rooted in their corporate purpose. It's an honor here to be joined by Bob White. He's the Executive Vice President and President of the Medical Surgical Portfolio for Medtronic. And he's here to talk about the power of purpose. And he'll provide a deeper look into how the company leans into its sense of purpose to make such a difference. Bob, it's just so great to have you join us this afternoon.
Oh, Mark, it's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
You bet. Let's get into the first question, Bob. So what led Medtronic to make the decision to join the effort and to organize around this cause and go from donation partner to assuming responsibility for implementation?
Yeah, well, Mark, thanks. You know, we were honored to be pulled in to the effort by Amazon and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, two outstanding organizations. And, you know, that initial involvement with Amazon and the U.S. Chamber led to a great partnership. And for us, as you mentioned, it really starts with our mission, right? Our mission to alleviate pain, restore health, and extend life is really what drives us. And if you think about it, we're privileged in that 2 people every second around the world benefit from a Medtronic therapy. So just in the few minutes that we're going to talk together, thousands of people will benefit from a Medtronic therapy. And from the beginning, we knew we had a role to play in the pandemic response. And for us, it came down to 3 things. It was ramping, sharing, and innovating. And ramping meant ramping meant increasing our ventilator production 5-fold from what it was. And, you know, sharing, you know, the broad steps we took to put on the web and open source the intellectual property for the ventilator design for our PB560, because we knew the world needed to respond to this. And finally, sharing some really innovative things, including the relationship that we formed here with the U.S. Chamber and Amazon to deliver ventilators where they were needed most. So it was an amazing effort from a team across the world, Mark.
Yeah, you know, Bob, I mean, I remember those early days being in all those calls, and your CEO was involved. You know, Jeff Murtha was in on this from the very beginning.
He really was. You know, we were having daily calls in the morning and in the evening, you know, on the phone with the White House task force governors in the U.S., but also around the world. And so really the whole organization aligned around what can Medtronic do to help respond.
Yeah, and the other thing that really struck me was not all the pieces were in one place, right? And we Medtronic amazingly assembled these machines. Some were here, some were in Ireland, some were in other parts of Southeast Asia, because you just can't plug and play a Medtronic ventilator here in the U.S. to a hospital in India.
No, you're absolutely right, Mark. Look, a high-end ventilator like the PB980 has 1,750 parts, right? So it's a complex electromechanical device. We manufacture them in Galway, but the supply chain is around the world. And then as we formed the partnership with the U.S. Chamber and Amazon, we knew these vents needed to be delivered into India in some of the most remote places around the world. And we had to coordinate that globally. And as the video said, Kwan and her team just did an amazing job on literally a 24-hour clock to make sure we got these vents where they needed to be.
Yeah, and for the audience, it truly was a 24-hour effort. I would wake up every morning and open my WhatsApp app, and there were pictures of ventilators being installed in hospitals all over India by the Medtronic technicians. It was really remarkable.
It was nice. And, you know, one of the things you realize is it's about having the people on the ground who know the region intimately, right, who could make sure that we could get the vents to the right places. And so that involved working with government authorities, you know, local hospitals, making sure the clinicians were trained appropriately. So it was really a team effort to do it.
Yeah, and Bob, I mean, your background, I mean, you were in charge of the emerging markets business in Singapore for quite some time, and you've seen how difficult it can be to do something like this. Tell us some of the other obstacles and challenges and how Medtronic overcame them.
Well, thanks, Mark. Look, some of the things we take for granted in the US or in other large developed markets just doesn't exist from an infrastructure standpoint in these emerging markets. And so our first will come back to our people and their commitment to just the purpose of doing the right thing, because when you're on the ground, you have a way to see your way through obstacles. That was first. And then two, it was really great collaboration with NGOs, with government authorities, and with corporate partners to ensure that not only did the vents get to those places where they were needed most, but then the training of the clinicians and the ICU staff was done. Because the worst thing you'd want is for a vent to show up and not be used. And the opposite happened. The team executed not only the last mile of delivery, but the training to make sure that they could immediately be put on patients. And that's a lot more challenging than waking up in the US, but the team was incredibly responsive and just constantly figured out ways to overcome challenges.
Yeah, and one of those challenges was because it was a hotspot.
Yeah.
The Medtronic technicians, they were at risk when they did all of this work, and they put their personal safety aside to do for the greater good.
Mark, you're so right. And it does kind of come down to this power with a purpose, right? I mean, this was power with purpose because our employees in India knew it could be their mother, their father, their aunt, their uncle, right, that was going to benefit from this therapy. And the resiliency, the resourcefulness, and the passion to just respond and deliver life-saving equipment like this was amazing.
So with that, Bob, I mean, what do you think sets Medtronic apart and enables you to respond in such a way for the ventilators or for other initiatives around the globe?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think it's three things. One, size and scale matters, right? We've got 90,000 employees around the world. We treat 70 different therapies in the body. We've got, we spent over $2.5 billion on R&D. We've got 300 clinical trials. So size and scale matters here because we were able to mobilize Medtronic, not just in a small operating unit, but across. So that's the first one. The second one, and it's the way we started, Mark, it's the commitment to the culture. The authentic response to our employees to alleviate pain, restore health, and extend life was so authentic. And that really drove it. And it allowed our teams to break down silos and just really focus on the problem at hand. And the third thing I would say was the speed and agility. Mark, literally what would previously have taken us months took weeks, what would take weeks took days, and how the team rallied to respond. So I think those three things really kind of helped set the team apart.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned speed and agility, Bob, because it's the one thing that really struck me when I said I've never seen anything quite like it. It was speed and agility from the beginning to get the companies assembled, for the companies to make the donations so we could afford to run the program, for Medtronic to work with the shippers. And we haven't mentioned this in depth, but it really was remarkable to me is the ability of the government of India to plug in, right?
Mark, I think you're absolutely right. And it was so heartwarming to see, because sometimes we can be critical of governments and their response. And I think we saw the very best out of India here as well, realizing the crisis that was on hand. How do they respond? And I thought it was amazing. And, I think we all leave this, well, not through the pandemic, so don't take me the wrong way, but I think there are real durable lessons that whether you're in the private sector and the public sector that you can take away from this that will make us better, going forward.
Agreed, Bob. And durability, right? It's these styles and ventilators just weren't or are not just only being used to help COVID patients. They're there to stay.
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And, we hope the pandemic passes, but the reality is people need assistance from a ventilator to breathe, right? That's what a vent does. It helps you breathe, right? It takes over for your lungs. And so it's critical piece of intensive care equipment.
And that's what we heard from the government of India, where some of these hospitals, they didn't have access to ventilators and didn't think they would for any time in the future. So now they have, this great piece of life-saving equipment that they can use for years on end.
Yeah, it's absolutely right, Mark. And, I was just recently learned of a story from a patient I want to share with you. And, you know, um, Nagaland is in a very mountainous region of India in the northeast corner, and it's very difficult. And so if you think about when wave 2 of the pandemic was hitting, thousands of people were being afflicted with the disease daily, right? And then, of course, you're seeing hundreds of thousands of people die from this. And we learned a story recently of an 80-year-old man who was in a very remote village, was brought to the hospital in Nagaland and was brought to the ICU, was, tried to sustain there, but they couldn't hold his oxygen levels. And so he was put on a PB980, one of the ventilators that were installed. And after a week, regained and was able then to go home. And, you realize through the care of his physician and the PB980 that his life was saved. And that's what inspires the thousands of Medtronic employees every day to wake up and save a life. And, I love the email that his physician sent us. It kind of closed with the phrase of stay healthy, stay safe, and keep in the service of humanity. And that's what this was about, right? And that was why we're so grateful the partnership with the U.S. Chamber, with Amazon. It really came together to help save lives. And when we can do that every day, we feel pretty good about that.
Well, we feel good about it too, Bob. And we want to thank you and all your colleagues at Medtronic for what you've done to make the world a better place with the ventilators, but also everything else you do all year long. Bob, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mark. It's a real privilege.
And before we go to the next session, I'd be remiss not to recognize all the companies that did provide the financial resources to bring the ventilator program to India. I'll leave you all with an exit slide listing these generous corporations. Thank you.